Buddham saranam gacchami. I go for refuge in the Buddha. Dharmam saranam gacchami. I go for refuge in the teachings. Sangam saranam gacchami. I go for refuge in the community. For over 2,000 years, this simple recitation has been used to mark conversion to Buddhism, to affirm one's devotion, and to start Buddhist rituals. Buddhism, of course, is a descriptive label placed upon an extremely diverse religious and philosophical tradition that stretches across Asia from North India and Nepal to Mongolia, from Thailand to Japan. But this tradition can be described as having a certain unity because of its single origin in the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, and because of its history that's driven and woven together through the institution of monasticism and certain core teachings that all Buddhists share. The writers of the book Religion and Globalization stress the diversity of Buddhism. In the Himalayas, a Tibetan monk wearing a humble red robe may seal himself into a cave retreat for 3 years and 3 months of meditative solitude. In the heart of urban Seoul, in Korea, Buddhists who are social justice activists and lay people, not monks, are supporting a railway union strike. Buddhist rituals can include what might be viewed as reverence for relics of the Buddha, chanting set phrases in the hope of rebirth in the heaven of a Buddha, doing good deeds in charity, performing intricate rituals to honor gods and Buddhas, or only meditating in order to reach enlightenment under one's own power. But Buddhism's basic teachings about life, mortality, and spiritual development have remained not unchanged but consistent and compelling amidst much change. Buddhism takes its origins from the life of an historical person. As you'd expect from an ancient oral tradition, historical kernels of fact have become interwoven with legend. I think it's important to read the full story that's told in the book, The Teaching of Buddha, published by a Japanese Society for Buddhist Understanding. This will give you the full mixture of important stories that go along with the life of the Buddha. But to kind of give an overview, Siddhartha Gautama was born as a prince within a Hindu family in North India. According to legend, his mother died when he was a very small child. And there was a prediction by a holy man that he would either become a great ascetic monk or he would become a great world leader. And of course his father wanted him to be king after him, so he kept him in the palace in order to make sure that he would follow the path of a leader. He was trained in the arts of government and war, surrounded by everything he could possibly want. Inevitably, he escaped one night with his chariot driver and went out into the world. All of the legends describe the impact of the 4 passing sights, the things that he saw when he first went outside the palace. A sick man, an old man, a corpse being carried in a funeral procession, and an ascetic monk. An ascetic being a person who practices severe physical self-discipline for spiritual reasons. These 4 passing sights overthrew Siddhartha's rosy assumptions about life, and also offered an idea about the personal path he could take to escape the spiritual emptiness, in the words of the authors of Religion and Globalization, the spiritual emptiness he felt in his sheltered existence. So Siddhartha ran away at about age 29 to become a monk. He tried meditation techniques. He tried fanatical fasting and breath control. But he rejected those methods as too extreme. From then on, the Buddha came to believe, and Buddhism today is still called sometimes the middle path or middle way, that you have to take the mean between the extremes of too much luxury or self-indulgence and too much asceticism. So, having decided this, Siddhartha eventually made a vow to sit down under a a fig tree or ficus tree by a river outside the town of Gaya in North India. And he vowed that he would stay there until he found success or death. According to legends, he was tempted or disturbed by Mara, a supernatural being or demon, kind of like the devil testing Jesus in the desert when he was out there for 40 days. And Siddhartha's gesture of touching his right hand to the earth meant that he was asking the earth to bear witness to his merit and eventual success. And this earth-touching gesture, with the Buddha seated cross-legged under a tree, is one of the most common depictions of the Buddha in art. So later that night, after defeating Mara and resuming his meditations, Siddhartha reached or attained some supernatural faculties, such as memory of his former lives, a kind of psychic vision, and the ability of being able to communicate with people in exactly the way that they needed. Finally, he completely got rid of all desire and ignorance by fully realizing his capacity for insight, or prana. This awakening, or enlightenment, to the nature of reality was the moment when he became the Buddha, a word that just means the awakened one. So his central insight as he sat there in meditation was that what was keeping him from enlightenment or being free from suffering was the very strength of his desire for enlightenment itself. So he realized he needed to let go even of the desire for enlightenment itself. After this experience, the Buddha remained for around 7 weeks in the area near the tree where he had attained enlightenment. His very first disciples, according to one story, were householders or ordinary lay people who came to him with offerings and asked for his blessings. And then he walked to Sarnath, or the famous deer park outside the city of Varanasi in India. He found his former ascetic fellow practitioners, and he taught them the 4 noble truths that end in the Eightfold Path. This teaching gave rise to one of the central symbols of Buddhism, an 8-spoked wheel flanked by 2 deer. So these fellow monks or ascetics were the first members of the Sangha, or monastic community, an institution that has been part of Buddhism from the beginning and that has given it its strength and continuity. The Buddha instructed them to share the teaching, the Dharma just means teaching, with others, and to travel in the 4 directions to the end of the earth, carrying these teachings. He taught and traveled for 40 years, and before he died, according to legend, he gave the instruction that no one person or no one institution should be set up as the final authority in Buddhism. That kind of paved the way for the diversity and pluralism and ability to adapt that Buddhism has had throughout history. The heart of the Buddha's teaching can be described as the 4 Noble Truths. There are many translations of this set of ideas. I'll offer one translation with brief explanations. We have discussed these in class. Life is full of suffering, or dukkha. Birth is suffering, illness is suffering, old age is suffering, seeing someone you don't like is suffering, not getting something you want is suffering. So the first noble truth is simply to be realistic, not pessimistic or fatalistic about life, but realistic, to accept the fact that life is full of suffering. Also, the writers of Religion and Globalization point out, an appropriate response to the truth of suffering is to show compassion, or karuna, to others and to alleviate the suffering of all other beings. The second noble truth is to realize that suffering arises from craving desire, tanha, or attachment. This is probably the key insight within Buddhism. Here in the West, we tend to think that suffering arises from being deprived of what we want. We look outside of ourselves for the causes of suffering. Within Buddhism, the causes of suffering are identified as being within the person, our attitudes towards circumstances. The writers of Religion and Globalization use the term trishna, or thirst, for desire. I think that there's a distinction between the thirsts of the physical body, that's the phrase used in the teaching of Buddha, the thirsts of the physical body, and attachment or tanha. The thirsts of the physical body are natural. We're hungry. We're thirsty, we feel sexual attraction, we feel the desire to preserve our lives, to preserve our bodies from harm, to seek security. Those things are natural. However, those natural desires can lead to cravings or attachments. Gluttony, the desire to eat too much. Addictions, the desire to drink or smoke too much. Lust, promiscuity, the desire to possess a person with jealousy and exclusiveness in a relationship, the desire to possess more things than we need. So I think, personally, this is my personal comment, that there's a distinction between Trishna, the thirst of the physical body, which are really natural, we all have them, and tanha, craving, desire, or attachment. Now, according to the third noble truth, we can get rid of tanha. And if we are able to let go, to detach ourselves from tanha, craving, desire, then we will be able to let go of suffering, or to be free from suffering. The fourth noble truth, of course, is that the way for removing tanha is the Noble Eightfold Path. This outline of the Noble Eightfold Path comes largely from Religion and Globalization. There are many descriptions of it. The writers base their description on the work of a 5th century AD commentator Buddhaghosa from the Theravada school. We'll talk in a little bit about the difference between Theravada and Mahayana schools within Buddhism. He divided the Eightfold Path into 3 aspects: morality, how you act, meditation, and insight, with the key to the whole thing being insight. Insight means how you look at the world and yourself, how you choose to see reality. So, right view, especially the Four Noble Truths, is how you look at yourself and the world. The concepts of anatta, or the no-self, anicca, or impermanence, and shunyata, something like emptiness, are a part of right view. Right thought means that we can choose our thoughts, and our thoughts are shaped by right view and by detachment from hatred and cruelty. Right speech. The teaching of the Buddha emphasizes how speech can lead to action, so right thought and right speech will lead to right action. So right speech refrains from lying, from gossip, and from unnecessary talk. Right action is defined negatively as action that is free of killing, stealing, and harming. Right livelihood, refraining from earning a living through anything that can kill or inflict harm on others as a career. Almost everything we do may unintentionally inflict harm upon other lives. But careers, perhaps such as being in the military, for example, that inflict harm or killing on others, would be something that a Buddhist would want to refrain from. Also, refraining from astrology and magic spells. Right effort is the effort to clear and calm the mind. Right mindfulness is the distinctive form of Buddhist meditation, observing clearly the mind and body and cultivating detachment. And right concentration is described as another form of advanced meditation that attains the mastery of trance states. Several concepts that are key to the core metaphysics of Buddhism, a philosophy that is in some way shared by all, or at least most, of the different forms of Buddhism, include prajna, or insight, seeing into the nature of reality as it truly is; anatta, or the no-self. This is a denial of the existence of the Atman, the Hindu Vedantic concept of an eternal, unchanging principle that's located deep within the human personality and does not change and does not go away. So the Buddha rejected the idea that there is a self, or ego personality, as it's translated in the teaching of Buddha, some sort of unchanging interior entity at the center of a person, or soul. Buddhist teaching would deny the existence of a soul as it is conceived in Christianity. The person is viewed as a collection of 5 skandhas, or aggregates. Think of the person as a kind of constant flow or flux or process, like a river that's constantly moving and constantly changing. And these 5 things are constantly flowing and interacting with each other. The body, that is made of the combination of the 4 elements, earth, fire, air, and water. Feelings that arise from sensory contacts, the 5 senses. Perceptions. Perceptions attach the categories good and evil to our sensory inputs. In other words, we feel something with our senses, but then we judge it. Is this pain or pleasure? Is it good or bad? Habitual mental dispositions, we might call them characteristics or virtues that connect will to mental action, and the consciousness or vijnana that arises when mind and body come into contact with the external world. In some Buddhist teaching, there's the claim or the acknowledgement that consciousness does persist. And this allows for the idea of reincarnation within Buddhism. I don't think that the Buddhist concept of reincarnation is exactly the same as the Hindu concept. It's not so much that there's an enduring self that enters into one body after another. It's more that through this constant flow of realities throughout the universe, there's a connection between one life and the next. And within Buddhism also there is a concept of karma, a kind of spiritual, metaphysical force where if you put bad deeds into the world, then misfortune is what is going to come back to you in this life or the next. And much of popular devotional Buddhist practice has become caught up with the desire to earn good karma through merit-producing activities. Religion and Globalization gives a rather entertaining merit sheet. Doesn't say what the source is, or perhaps it says in a footnote that I don't have time to flip to, but these are selections from a merit account sheet, a description of things that people can do either to earn good karma and create blessings in their lives and in the next life, or to earn demerits or bad karma. So for example, 100 merits is to save a life, prevent a child from drowning, or continue a family lineage. 3 merits, endure ill treatment without complaints, bury an animal, or urge those making a living by killing to stop. 1 merit, give something to help others, provide for 1 monk, chant a Buddhist scripture, or return a lost possession. Demerits include causing a death or ending a family lineage, urging another person to fight, helping another person doing evil, getting angry over words spoken, wasting food, killing insects, and turning away a begging monk, or keeping a lost article. So Buddhist metaphysics does include the idea of a non-physical or spiritual force, karma, whereby one's actions, positive or negative, can produce influences in one's future life. Impermanence or anicca also is a central notion of Buddhism. Nothing is permanent. A person who practices Buddhist mindfulness will probably be constantly thinking about how everything that happens and everything that exists is the product of causes and conditions that stretch all the way back to the beginning of the universe to bring this particular thing into existence. And then the awareness that this particular thing, whatever it is that's in front of me, will flow out of existence. For example, the teacup on the table in front of me is chipped. The kids must have chipped it when they put it in the dishwasher. I looked at it and I thought, what a pity, it's a nice mug. But in 1,000 years, where is this cup going to be? It's not going to be in existence. 1,000 years ago, the atoms and chemical elements that were in this cup, they were somewhere else. So everything that we encounter might seem to be real, but in fact everything is constantly flowing in and out of existence. And everything that happens, whether they're fortunate and happy events or events that seem sad to us, are also the product of causes and conditions that stretch way back in time. The Buddha dismisses the role of a god or gods in causality, and also dismisses the notions of pure materialism and pure chance. So things don't just happen randomly, they happen according to interlocking and interacting causes and conditions. Some of the core ethical teachings of Buddhism include the 5 precepts. These are likely the earliest that the Buddhists developed. In South and Southeast Asia, they're chanted regularly in rituals by both monks and lay people, ordinary people. In some communities, the precepts are regarded as general ideals that can apply to everyone, but Mahayana schools tend to regard the precepts more as vows. You would chant them only if you really intended to follow them completely. And one can omit reciting a precept if you cannot expect to actually observe it. So, not to destroy life intentionally, but the flip side of that is to behave with kindness and compassion. First, second, not to steal, but the flip side is to act with generosity and renunciation or non-attachment. Third, not to have sexual misconduct or promiscuity, but the flip side of that is seeking joyous satisfaction with one's spouse. Fourth, not to lie, but the flip side of that is loving the truth, seeking it, pursuing discernment and insight. Fifth, no intoxication, but the flip side of not being drunk or high is being mindful, content, and aware, especially through meditation. In addition to these 5, 3 additional precepts are added to make 8 precepts. These are usually taken and observed more rigorously by ordinary people, householders, or lay people, not just monks, on holy days. So the 3 additional renunciations are not to eat solid food after noon, not to participate in shows, which I suppose in our time would be something like going to a nightclub, dancing, singing, wearing garlands, perfumes, or jewelry. And 8, not to sleep on high or wide beds, which I guess means sleeping on the floor. The 10 precepts, in addition, would be observed by novice monks and are undertaken as a long-term commitment. They are made up of the 8, but split one of these into 2 parts and add a final prohibition against handling money, which means that monks must beg for a living. This precept creates the foundation for the interaction between monks and lay people, householders, ordinary people who work and earn a living, that has sustained Buddhism through much of its history. The monks depend on donations for their livelihood. The lay people depend on the monasteries for services such as education and medical care, but also for merit. Supporting a monk, donating to a monastery, is believed to produce merit or good karma. Chinese Buddhism adds an emphasis on the mutual obligations of parents and children toward each other, especially children toward parents. This link, I would encourage you to take some time to listen to it. A contemporary composer has woven the 5 precepts and the 3 refuges into a contemporary song intended to help young people remember them. It's a beautiful marriage of monastic chant with contemporary music. So the Buddha instructed his followers to spread his teachings in 4 directions. This is the clearest small map I could find. You could end the show and perhaps enlarge it to take a closer look at it, of the spread of Buddhism. And you can see how it has really permeated much of Asia, from Central Asia, Afghanistan, Mongolia, to China, to Korea, to Japan, south into India, into Myanmar, called Burma on this map, into Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. We talked about these countries in our class at the beginning of the semester. And even though hardly as a majority religion, down into Indonesia. The Indian Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BC was kind of like the Asian version of Constantine. His conversion to Buddhism really helped this philosophy and religion to spread beyond the place where the Buddha originally experienced his conversion. And by AD 100, Buddhism had reached China through Central Asia. One of the things that the Emperor Ashoka did was give support to monasteries and to monks, and really to begin to build monasteries as institutions. Each country and region has seen Buddhism go through complex changes. There are more different branches and forms of Buddhism than I can possibly describe in one PowerPoint slide. But the two main branches are considered the Theravada branch or school, which permeates Southeast Asia more, and the Mahayana school, which is almost everywhere else. The Theravadins see themselves as more strictly following the Buddha's original teachings, and I think it was the Theravada monks who have preserved the Three Baskets, the oldest collection of the sayings of the Buddha. Also, Theravada Buddhism emphasizes the importance of monasticism. You really kind of have to be a monk to fully dedicate yourself to the pursuit of enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhists, and the word Mahayana means large boat, in a sense is more inclusive. In Mahayana Buddhism, lay people, ordinary people, can reach enlightenment. Sangha, or monastic communities, and monasteries became institutions that helped to spread Buddhism and also helped to make it permanent, make it endure. A monk or a nun is a person who gives up their possessions, joins a community, often gives up marriage, though not always, and lives simply according to a set of rules, strict rules that were set out in the Buddha's original teaching and that were handed on within the monastery. One monastic ritual that I think many monks perform according to religion and globalization is that every 14 days they will chant the rule to remind themselves of the rules that they live by. Within India, the monasteries disregarded caste, so they were kind of an equalizing force, and they offered educational opportunities to ordinary people. There were many different interpretations of the Dharma, or the teaching, within Buddhist monasticism. Donations from householders are essential to keep the monastery going, and the householders or ordinary people, working people, would believe that they could earn merit or good karma by making the donations. There are two kinds of monasteries that flourished in the early centuries of Buddhism. Forest monasteries or hermitages, where people would be a little bit more isolated and focus on meditation and ascetic spiritual practices. And then urban monasteries, where the monks would also offer service to the communities, medical help, rituals that the community needed to be performed, and also education. The successful monasteries within Buddhism expanded, and they sent out monks to establish additional monasteries that would help to spread Buddhism. These monasteries would root the faith or ground the faith in every locality. It kind of reminds me of how St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer established Calumet College, and now Calumet College is independent. This is kind of what happened with the Buddhist monasteries, and they created a network that spread along the major trade routes through Asia. The monasteries came to be heavily supported by rulers in the ancient and medieval Asian world. They would support Buddhism. Rulers and governors would support Buddhism because of the Buddhist emphasis on morality, and also because the monks had the power, the ability to legitimate Buddhist ruler in the eyes of the public. So Buddhist monks or Buddhist preachers might call a particular ruler a bodhisattva, who's a future Buddha, or a just king. So leading monks in the community could offer those wielding political power terms of legitimation in the eyes of the faithful. For example, in China and Japan, emperors would order the governors to build monasteries. And monasteries along the trade routes sometimes became lending institutions like banks. They would lend money and then people would pay the money back with interest, and that's a way that they would raise funds for themselves. They sometimes rented space to merchants to warehouse their items and sell their items. And when they received land as donations, people would donate land to the monasteries. They would then rent that out to farmers in exchange for a portion of their crop or in exchange for cash. They collected manuscripts and created libraries. They offered people public services. They managed shrines and pilgrimage sites. After the death of the Buddha, according to legend, his body was cremated, and his cremated remains were divided into 8 portions, and these portions were placed in, I don't know what to call them, pilgrimage sites or monuments called stupas. This is an image of a stupa. And the stupas today are found in different parts of Asia. Monks would sometimes be tasked with tending these monuments, and the pilgrims who came would sometimes also give offerings to help maintain the monasteries. Mahayana, one branch of Buddhism, branched off into a number of schools that are important for us to understand, because the Midwest Buddhist Temple is kind of an offshoot of one of these schools. Mahayana Buddhism took what could be called a less conservative approach, interpreting the spirit of the Buddha's teaching rather than sticking to the strict letter. And in Mahayana Buddhism, lay people or ordinary people as well as monks can attain enlightenment. The writings of an Indian monk named Nagarjuna around the AD 100s were important in developing a branch of Mahayana Buddhism. He opposed the traditionalists, and that opposition kind of coalesced in his writings. Nagarjuna, now I'm not familiar with this thought, this is all almost verbatim from Religion and Globalization. He argued that all language is conventional. In other words, reality is a mental construct or a linguistic construct. And all oppositions created by language are mere constructions. You might see echoes of this teaching in the text, the teaching of the Buddha. Instead of opposition, the translators of that text use the word discrimination. Even the notions of nirvana and samsara, or nirvana and reincarnation, or nirvana, enlightenment and ignorance, are constructs that ultimately have to be called into question. It is through understanding how humans construct reality arbitrarily from nothingness or shunyata that one is released from all illusions and desires and from the cycle of rebirths. In Nagarjuna's teaching, all reality lacks essential self-existence and is inherently empty, shunya. Every entity entirely depends upon others for its meaning, opposite of Western Hobbesian individualism. So no thing can be shown to have its own independent reality. This would be part of right view. Nagarjuna stated that the purpose of his deconstructive philosophical effort was religious, to clear away, well, not really religious, you could say spiritual, to clear away all false assumptions and even the subtle attachment to language and intellectual categories, opening the way to find true enlightenment in meditation practices that transcend words. Another major school of Mahayana thought that continued from Nagarjuna's writing was the consciousness-only school. This is the idea that the only thing that really exists is the consciousness. Karma works within the stream of consciousness, seeded by past actions that block pure, passionless seeing. The mind or consciousness is all that truly exists, and so the spiritual life, through meditation, must be devoted to purifying it. One of the most popular Buddhist scriptures in Asia was the Lotus Sutra, originally written in Sanskrit by around 100 AD. The Lotus Sutra emphasizes the theory of cosmic Buddhahood. You may hear something like this in the teaching of the Buddha as well. This is the notion that the human Buddha, who lived around the 500s BC, is in fact the embodiment of a more universal Buddha reality that can materialize in many forms simultaneously throughout the cosmos. A person who becomes enlightened or who will be enlightened in the future is a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva should not consider ending their existence until all beings are enlightened. This notion of the bodhisattva, or the person who can reach Buddhahood, blossomed into an idea within Buddhism that's almost similar to the concept of saints within Catholicism. Bodhisattvas are believed to have garnered the merit necessary to earn rebirth as divinities. So these celestial bodhisattvas, according to this tradition, continue to serve humanity by offering compassionate intervention, both for worldly blessings and as a means to enlightenment. So in a sense, there's the idea of Buddhist saints who can actually help the rest of us achieve enlightenment. This is in contrast with the Theravada school, which much more emphasizes that enlightenment is the result of one's own effort only. Zen Buddhism also emphasizes this notion. I think that one has to reach enlightenment through pure effort, not so much by the help from a saint. And so the idea of bodhisattvas also allowed for the flowering of many ritual traditions that one finds in Buddhism. Temples, icons, monastic priesthoods, ritual traditions, traditions of prayer. All of these things evolved to sort of maintain these Mahayana practices of worship toward the bodhisattvas. And so for the great majority of common people, being a Mahayana devotee meant performing rituals and asking for blessings from these compassionate divinities. And so Buddhism has generated its own cult of saints, in a sense. Pure Land Buddhism, particularly in Japan, focuses on the idea that the bodhisattvas vowed to create heavenly paradises, and that through earning merit, a person could be reborn into one of these heavenly paradises. And one of the most important and highly developed Pure Land tradition was that associated with a Buddha entitled Amitabha or Amida. Pure Land followers believe that by drawing upon this Buddha's cosmic power through chanting and devotional practices, even those with bad karma could be reborn in the celestial paradise. In Japan, Pure Land Buddhism evolved as devotees were taught that your own power was insufficient to reach nirvana, and that you needed to draw upon the other power of celestial Buddhas and bodhisattvas. However, the meditation school arose kind of in reaction to Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land emphasizes the necessity of bodhisattvas or saints or other powers to help you achieve enlightenment. This more traditional approach, Chan or Zen, stressed that individual effort only is the way to reach enlightenment, and that this was the Buddha's true teaching. Chan, or Zen in Japan, stresses meditation, this life realization, rather than the desire to be reborn into heaven. You focus on who you can become in this life, and self-power.